everyone. Welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. My name is Kristen, and I go over true stories every week, twice a week usually, and they always have a mystery element, but also miracles, at least one in every story that I do. So it kind of leaves you off just feeling good at the end. So if that sounds cool, listen along and we'll get started. Today's story, it's about a man named Steve Callahan, and it took place in 1982. When I was researching and reading about this story, again, another one that I had never heard of. Of course, I was just a toddler when this happened, but, again, never heard of it. So I thought it very interesting. In 1982, Steve, he had survived 76 days lost at sea. You're just going to be like, wow, about this one. Anyway, on February 6, 1952 is when Steve was born. He was born in Needham, Massachusetts. At the age of 12, he joined the Boy Scouts and enjoyed that a lot. There is where he learned to sail. And his love of sailing just grew from there. By the time he was 16, he had already taken several solo trips. And by the time he was an adult, Steve was taking solo trips by himself, coastal trips, over 100 miles long. And he loved it. He loved every minute of it. Part of his childhood dream was to one day be able to cross the Atlantic, whether it be alone or a duo with a buddy or somebody else that enjoys sailing. So that was his goal and purpose to one day be able to do. January 1981, Steve was 29 years old, and he sailed from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda. And he sailed on his 6.5 meter sloop. Never heard of a sloop, but it's some sort of a boat. Once he was there, he then sailed to Cornwall, UK to visit his good friend. And then after he spent time with his friend, he left and sailed down to the Spanish and Portuguese coasts. Then on January 29th, 1982, Steve started to sail home to America from the Canary Islands. And it was in the middle of the night on February 4th that things would take a big turn. He was dead asleep when this occurred. Something, again, in the middle of the night on February 4th, came crashing into his boat. And of course, it was like jarring because, whatever crashed into it was huge. And the big crash, whatever it was, made a huge hole in the hull of the boat. After the fact, it was thought that it had to be a big shark or maybe a huge whale because nothing else could have done something that much damage to a boat. Well, cold water's rushing in, pouring in so fast. Steve's thinking, oh my gosh, what happened? He's, woken out of a dead sleep and he's realizing what occurred. And he's thinking to himself, I'm going to die. What am I going to do? So he immediately goes into just survivor mode. He's grabbing supplies here and there, and he realizes that a lot of his supplies he needs are already submerged underwater. So he had to twice dive into the icy, freezing cold water to go back under and grab some of the supplies that he needed. And of course, you have to remember, all the while he's doing this, the boat is continuing to sink. So thank goodness he didn't get stuck up under there and drown or anything when that was occurring. When he was grabbing supplies, he did grab his 6-foot rubber raft, otherwise he wouldn't have made it. So thank goodness he got that. And it was found out after that at this point, he was like 800 miles from the Canary Islands. And this was before a lot of technology like certain radar, cell phones, all that stuff. So he was screwed, basically. He did have the raft, though. He did have some food and flares for setting off to try to get another ship's attention. And of course, he had a few days' water. Luckily, there were also something called solar stills, which I learned about. I didn't know what that was. But it's a device, and it filters out seawater so that it's safe to drink. in emergencies. So he did have 2 of those. That was good. The only downside is Steve did not know how to use them. So it took him a few days to even learn and figure out how do I use these? And he also had a spear gun for fishing, so that was great. He found out that he was way out of range for his emergency position beacon to work, so that wasn't an option to call anybody. At this point, as he's still trying to learn to use those solar stills to filter out the seawater, the sharks started coming because, he's 800 miles out. And they're starting to get pretty aggressive with his raft. So he's getting worried because if they tear his raft to pieces, he's a goner. Oh, and by the way, the 2 solar stills that he had, they only filter 1 pint of water a day. So it's not like you get a whole ton. 2 weeks go by and Steve's still floating adrift. He sets off one of his flares when he notices a ship way on the horizon out there. Unfortunately, when he set those flares off, they didn't see him. So that kind of obviously made him a little bit depressed. After that point, the flares aren't working. He got into a deep, deep despair. I mean, imagine what that would do to you mentally and emotionally when you have no contact with another person and you feel like, I may die out here. I can see how you would easily get into just a depression and just a deep, deep despair. Night after night, he would lay and look at the stars and, it's complete dark out there except for the stars and the moon. And he would just go over in his mind all the regrets in his life, things he did, said, or didn't do or say, almost like he thought, I don't know why, but it's just something I hear when I read stories about people thinking they are going to die. You know how they say that saying, your life flashes before your eyes kind of a thing. So I guess that's kind of what was taking place in his mind. A little fast forward, 40 days had now passed. He's still floating adrift, and at this point, his raft is heavily damaged because it had been out there so long. He was constantly having to use the little pump that he had to pump seawater out of the raft so it wouldn't sink. And, doing that so much constantly, he's not having time to rest or anything like that. So he's exhausted, and so exhausted, just physically, mentally, emotionally, he was going to give up at this point. He's like, I don't even care anymore, is how he was feeling. And he did give up. He gave up. He sat down, stopped pumping, and I keep saying luckily, but it was a blessing that he just got, after he'd given up for a little bit, something made him jump back up and go back into survivor mode. I guess that fear of death. And he immediately started getting to work again. He decided, okay, no, I don't want to give up. And he goes back to doing everything he's doing. During this, whole time, throughout these days, Steve saw a total of 9 ships out there on the horizon, and he used his flares, and not a one of those ships ever noticed or saw him. So Steve continued to use his spear. He caught fish and birds, and unfortunately, he did eat them raw. He had no way to cook them, and he had to eat. So that's what he continued to do during this time. Lo and behold, he did find a way to fix the raft so that the water stopped pouring in on it. So that was another little blessing. On April 20th, 1982, Steve had been at sea for 75 days, and it was on that day he noticed way out a faint light on the horizon. Wouldn't you know it, the next day, a fishing boat saw him and picked him up. That was day 76. And what made them notice the raft, it wasn't flares or anything like that. They had been fishing out there, and they noticed a swarm of birds just kind of circling way out. And they were like, what is that? What are they doing? So that's when they went to investigate the little fishing boat, and they saw Steve in his raft. So thank goodness for those birds, because would they have seen him if not? Probably not. So obviously he was rescued, and I'm sure he was just in tough shape at that point, but he was rescued. He was safe. And later on in Steve's life, he actually was hired as a tech advisor for that movie that came out, Life of Pi. And in 2012, unfortunately, Steve was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, but he did survive from it, and he's actually still an ambassador for that disease still to this day. There's actually a lot more details. I don't have the book, but he has a memoir. If you're available, I will put it in the description. It's Adrift, 76 Days at Sea by Steve Callahan. So I do plan on getting it because I think that would be an interesting read. But yeah, miracle after miracle in this one, in my opinion, as well. And I mean, if that had happened to me, there's no way I could have done all he did, So thank goodness he had everything that he did need to at least sustain himself till he was found. So interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know I did. I love these things. I always say that. So I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. And it's fun to see your comments, whether I know you or not, whether it's somebody new or family or friends. I love seeing it. Tell me what you think, or tell me if you didn't like it. I want to know it all. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys for the next story. Thank you.